The long-awaited 1.0 update for 7 Days to Die is finally here. And for people like me that had previously only played this game on the old legacy console versions, 1.0 marks a massive transformation in gameplay and mechanics. This guide should be helpful for anyone who's new to 7 Days, but it's specifically targeted towards legacy console players like myself that are used to the old mechanics and are trying to figure out what's different about the 1.0 version from their old legacy version. I'm going to walk you through my recommendations for what you do during your first 7 days to prepare for your Horde Night, and hopefully you can learn from some of the mistakes that I made so you don't make them as well. Similar to the legacy console versions, I recommend you start by looting your area as soon as you spawn, and then quickly finish the tutorial challenges until you get to the point where they tell you where the trader is. Once you get that done, I would recommend making yourself a stone spear, sledgehammer, or both. Both are useful for different circumstances. I found that the sledgehammer works better in open spaces, while the spear is handy for keeping zombies at a range or attacking them through holes in a door or a wall that zombies can't fit through. The weapon and tool crafting system is now completely different from the old legacy console versions. You no longer need to craft hundreds of wooden clubs to increase your weaponsmithing skill, but instead will find magazines while you're out looting that will increase your rank in each certain category, unlocking new weapons and recipes as you increase the respective rank. You will find magazines all over the world, but you especially find them in bookshelves, mailboxes, and anywhere you would think to find a magazine. Once you have your weapon, go to the trader and turn in the quest to meet him. Then he'll give you a shovel as a reward and give you another quest for your first buried supplies mission. I ended up waiting to do this mission until later, which I regretted, because if you do it immediately, he'll give you a starter kit for a pipe gun of whatever variety you want, as well as some ammo for it. I recommend trying to do this mission day 1 if you can. While you're at the trader, by the way, make sure to loot his outpost. The destroyed workstations especially have a lot of good loot and are likely to carry skill magazines. After completing that mission with the trader, I recommend finding a building or finding a spot that you'd like to build a base from scratch. These POIs will have skull indicators outside of them to indicate how difficult they are to defeat. Anything that is 3 skulls and above, I would definitely not recommend doing this early on in the game. Even 2 skulls was a little bit of a stretch here. Wherever you decide to set up your base, make sure that you put down a land claim block, which can be crafted for just 5 small stones, in order to prevent zombies from spawning around your actual base itself. Once you have an established base, with a bedroll, land claim block, and some storage containers for your stuff, begin collecting the materials for a dew collector as soon as you can. To unlock the recipe for the dew collector, you'll need to find a Forge Ahead magazine. And to build it, you'll need 100 scrap polymers, 4 short iron pipes, and 4 duct tape. If you looted the trader like I recommended earlier, you'll likely have found that magazine already. You can also make duct tape with glue and cloth, and the best way that I've found to get scrap polymers is to search trash and break down anything that's made of plastic or looks like it's made of plastic. Water jugs, plastic trash cans, etc. Just start breaking stuff and see if it pops out scrap polymers. The reason I recommend trying to get a dew collector as quickly as possible is because unlike the old legacy console versions, there are no longer reusable glass jars or cans that you can just fill up in any source of water and then boil easily at a fire. Getting your hands on water in the early game is now much more difficult than it was in the old console versions. The dew collectors produce dirty water by default, unless you get a water purifier, but you're pretty unlikely to find that in the early game. So you'll still need a cooking pot to boil that water, just like in the old console versions. Cooking pots can be found fairly commonly in kitchens, but if you're having trouble finding one, you can usually buy one from the trader fairly early on for around 600 tokens. If you get desperate, you can always drink directly from a water source. Just make sure you have nothing in your hands and then go up to the water and press the interact button. You will take some damage and you have a chance to get dysentery, but it can save you from dehydration in a pinch. Dysentery can still be removed with goldenrod tea or vitamins. Speaking of status effects, let's talk about infection. Unlike the old console versions, infection cannot be instantly removed by using honey or antibiotics. but instead those treatments only cure a certain percentage of the infection. Honey cures 5% of an infection, and antibiotics cure 25%. I recommend carrying honey around with you at all times so that if you get hit and get a mini infection, eat the honey and get rid of the infection before it reaches 5%. You can get honey as a fairly uncommon drop from destroying stumps, so I recommend destroying any stumps you come across. Plus, you'll get a little extra wood doing so. Another important change from the old console version is that you can no longer loot most of the zombies after you kill them. This is mainly to help with the game's stability, so it doesn't need to load so many entities at the same time with all of their loot. But every once in a while, zombies will drop loot bags, and the loot bags usually have pretty good stuff, so keep an eye out for those. Speaking of which, since you can no longer loot zombies, I used to be able to tell that the zombie was fully down and not just knocked down unconscious for a minute because I was able to loot them on the old console version. Now you'll need to pay attention to the bottom right corner and make sure you're seeing the XP pop up to know that you've dealt with the zombie. In the legacy console versions, dogs were often the most dangerous enemies that you would face during the early game, and that's somewhat still the case here. Generally speaking, animals are going to be more dangerous during the early game because they can run even during the day. The 1.0 version has junkyard dogs, infected bears, and even hostile boar, which replaced the passive pigs that were in the old Legacy Console edition. I would recommend avoiding these enemies during the early game. You can take on a boar or dog if you're ready for them, but definitely do not even try to fight an infected bear. I thought I could take one on as long as I kept him at a distance and just kept sniping him, and all I ended up doing was wasting all of my ammo and arrows, only for him to eventually break through the door anyways, and I had to run away. Farming has also changed considerably from the old Legacy version. Rather than tilling the land with a hoe and using fertilizer to increase the yields, you plant and farm plots and increase yields with perks and special farmer armor that you can unlock later on. I'd recommend that you save farming for a bit later in the playthrough, though, as without the right perks, it isn't really a reliable source of food in the early game. Instead, I'd recommend investing your perk points into animal tracking. At the first rank, it allows you to track small game like rabbits, chickens, and snakes, which should provide you enough meat to keep you going. The added benefit of this is that it will warn you if there's a snake close by so you don't get bit. With the animal tracking perk, it's not that hard to get your hands on meat, but until you unlock the grilled meat option by upgrading your cooking skill with magazines, you'll be stuck with charred meat, which dehydrates you, so you'll have to keep that in mind. This is especially complicated because of the added difficulty in getting purified water in this version of the game, so you'll have to keep in mind whether or not you want to eat so much charred meat, as it's going to continue to dehydrate you, and it's harder to get water in the early game. Because of this, you may want to consider investing a perk into Master Chef so that you can find more cooking magazines and unlock grilled meat faster. You can usually buy a grill from the trader for around 600 tokens if you've gotten to the point where you have unlocked grilled meat but you don't yet have a forge. Speaking of perks, overall I would recommend you focus your early game perks on skills for whatever weapons you're using, as well as Lucky Looter to just find better stuff. Other than that, you can pick whatever perks best fit your builds, or whatever you want to go for. If you don't know what build you're going for yet, or you want to be a little bit more of a generalist, I'd recommend focusing your perks on anything that can increase your survivability, either to damage or to the elements, as those are going to end up being helpful to pretty much whatever build you go with. Once you have yourself an established base with hopefully a dew collector and some storage, I'd recommend you begin gathering materials to build yourself a separate Horde base. Unlike the old console version, where the first Horde night isn't too bad and you can pretty much survive anywhere as long as you put in minimal prep time, the first Horde night in 1.0 will tear right through your defenses if you aren't ready. I expected the first Horde night to be about as difficult as the old console version, so all I did was put down some spike traps and wait on the roof of my base. Within the first few minutes of the Horde night, they had already broken into my base, through all of my spike traps, and were making their way up to the roof where I was. I also failed to save enough wood for myself to continue to make barriers while I was up on the roof. Before long, I was completely overwhelmed and had to make a run for it. I jumped off the roof and kept running around to the other buildings, doing parkour to escape the zombies for a while, but I was only delaying the inevitable at that point. Don't do what I did. Instead, build yourself a starter horde base by night 7, because even if you do survive at your main base, the zombies will probably have torn it completely apart. I'm no expert in base design, and I'm still getting used to this version myself, so I recommend looking up some starter horde bases on YouTube. I know that there are plenty of great designs out there that you can make fairly easily with some cobblestone rocks. Hopefully, some of these tips were helpful for you guys, and I hope that you can learn from some of the mistakes that I made so that you can be better prepared than I was come my first Horde night. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please consider giving it a like, and if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.